And I saw this before the show, and I wanted to talk about this at some length. And I'll get to Eric Adams, the mayor of New York City, his indictment. Why is he being indicted? We'll get to that in 1 second. But I saw this, which is from the Sustainable Development Impact Meeting with the World Economic Forum. Now, a lot of people may have heard of the WEF. It's not a good organization. It's very much connected to people like George Soros. It is something that many people feel is like the Illuminati. These are a group of individuals who are trying to maintain as much power as possible at the cost of your freedom. And they're willing to do this globally. But regardless of what you think about no matter what you think about the World Economic Forum, we know that John Kerry was speaking at one of their events. John Kerry, who is working as the environmental czar for the Biden-Harris administration. So what is he doing at this event? He's talking about the First Amendment. Now, you may say to yourself, but Mike, he's supposed to be working on the environment, green energy. What's that got to do with the First Amendment? My right to speak to you, for you to speak to me, to talk about politics, to talk about our government, to talk about our world, and to try and improve it. What's that got to do with green energy? And you would be right to say nothing, except we hear and we have this video, and in it, as quoted by Colin Wright, he says, our First Amendment stands as a major block to the ability to be able to hammer disinformation out of existence. What we need is to win the right to govern by hopefully winning enough votes that you're free to be able to implement change. I want you to think about that. What he just said is, we need to destroy the First Amendment. John Kerry, the green energy environmentalist czar for the Biden-Harris administration, the former Secretary of State under Barack Obama, his plan is take away free speech. And we've heard that Kamala Harris has said the same thing. She wants to limit free speech. She wants to get some form of the Disinformation Governance Board back in effect. If she wins the election, she wants to restrict your free speech online, social media, to restrict your speech. We know that the White House is currently coercing, not cooperating with, not suggesting. They are coercing, forcing social media companies to edit and isolate what you say, to put you on the naughty list and to restrict and suppress your voice. We know that. They went to the Supreme Court about this. We know that they're doing it. We know that Mark Zuckerberg, the CEO and creator of Facebook, he has come out and admitted that the Biden-Harris administration, the White House, twisted his arm and forced him to segregate and to suppress American citizens' voices on his platform because they didn't like what people were saying, because it wasn't politically advantageous. Mark Zuckerberg famously publicly came out and admitted that, something that we have known and mentioned many, many times for years now. So when we hear John Kerry say that he wants to break the First Amendment and destroy free speech, I'm not surprised. But I know what you're thinking. But Mike, this is coming from a group called End Wokeness. Who are these guys? And this guy, Colin Wright, he's an evolutionary biology PhD. What's he know about this? Well, you're right. The sources are a little questionable. That's why I went to Real Clear Politics, because I like to go to the biggest source I can very often with these statements. So let's get out of the Twitterverse. I'm not even going to look at his minor quote, and I know he has video, but let's go and see in full context, what is John Kerry talking about? So we go to Real Clear Politics, which is an essentially neutral site. And looking at Real Clear Politics, they're covering it today, September 29th. The article is posted by Tim Haynes. The title is John Kerry Tells the World Economic Forum Our First Amendment Stands as a Major Block Against Hammering Disinformation Out of Existence. Your free speech is preventing them from limiting your free speech. That's what he just said. That's what the title is about. I had to look at this. I said, oh my God, could this actually be happening before our face? That they are saying this out loud. This is the quiet part being said out loud. Last week, at a World Economic Forum panel on green energy, investing, and sustainable development, which have nothing to do with free speech, nothing to do with disinformation. They're not connected. So that the fact that John Kerry is connecting free speech with green energy investments, I don't understand. The fact that whether or not I agree with green energy policy is none of the business of John Kerry. He can't tell me I can't say that. To say that solar and wind do not work because they are not efficient, they are not effective. We don't have a grid that can carry the load. We don't have efficient batteries. We don't have proper removal and treatment for batteries that are old or that they get on fire. We don't have proper treatment for wind turbines. The blades, when they need to be removed, they're toxic. The solar panels are toxic. So, yeah, there are problems. Now, John Kerry may not like me saying these things, even though they are scientifically and empirically correct. These are all true statements backed up by deep science. And anyone who is actually serious about green energy is aware of each and every one of these issues, whether or not they agree with my conclusion that green energy is inefficient and ineffective, although the evidence shows it as such. That's another thing. But John Kerry wants to silence me for saying that. He wants to silence you for hearing that. It's not a discussion we're supposed to have. We're supposed to just bend over and take it. We're just supposed to be silent and obey. I disagree. Going on. According to the article from Politico, former U.S. Senator, former Secretary of State under the Obama administration. Notice they leave that out. They mentioned that he was a former senator. Well, after he was a senator, he was the Secretary of State for the Obama-Biden administration. That's a pretty big, pretty huge position. You would think they would mention that, except they don't want you to realize how important he is to Democrats and to their overall policy. See, they're giving him some distance so that he's not part of the regime, the progressive movement to the left. They want to distance him from that. They want him to seem like, well, he's just a senator, and then it's the first time he's working in any position of power. That's not true. He worked with the Iranians. He worked against the United States, against our allies. That has been found out. He's given away state secrets to the Iranians. He was part of the reason why the Iran nuclear deal exists and why Iran now has the ability to build drones and, more importantly, IBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles. So John Kerry, who's the Biden administration's climate envoy, identified the First Amendment, and I love this. They say John Kerry correctly identified the First Amendment as a major block preventing the government from halting the spread of disinformation. First of all, it's not the government's job to prevent misinformation or disinformation or any kind of information. That is not their job. That's why we have a First Amendment. It is not the job of the government to decide what is or is not information you can consume or create. Not their job. If you want to read about Bigfoot, you can. If you think mermaids are real, you can read about that. You can talk about that. If you want to convince a scientist, Einstein or whomever, about the earth being flat, you have that right. Whether it's disinformation or misinformation or incorrect information, it doesn't matter. That is your First Amendment right. They cannot and should never interfere with that. And yet they're trying to justify this. And they're saying that the First Amendment is a problem. It is a problem that you have free speech, that you can talk to people and say, this is what I think. Just like this program, you may say, Mike, I don't agree with anything that you've said. That's fair. We can have that conversation. You may want to, if you think that Kamala Harris is great, that she's a brilliant politician, we can have that conversation. You can provide your evidence and I can provide mine. That's the freedom of free speech. Now, John Kerry may not like it. Kamala Harris may not like it because I may convince people that she's an idiot, that she only has 3 talking points and every question she's asked comes back to those 3 points. That's it. She has 3 talking points and Orange Man black in Orange Man bad in every single question she gets asked. She always circles back. I grew up middle class. I'm going to give a $25,000 tax credit to first-time home buyers. I'm going to give parents with their first newborn child, the first year of their life, we're going to give them $6,000. Now, from age 1 through 21, it's on you. You don't get the tax credit. But for the newborn, you'll get a $6,000 tax credit. Isn't she great? These are the issues she says over and over and over again because she doesn't actually have policy, because she doesn't actually understand the issues, and she can't answer anything outside of what she has memorized that they spent the first 40 days of her campaign drilling into her these 3 talking points and Orange Man bad. And that's all she can say. She has nothing else. And she's horrible at saying those things. And we've seen that in the interview in CNN, ABC, and MSNBC. Don't have to believe me. I've covered them all. She says the same exact talking points every single question. And because John Kerry doesn't like that. More importantly, because the Democratic Party and the WEF don't like me pointing out that she only has 3 things she can say in an interview with the mainstream news media after being vice president for 3.5 years. Well, they call that disinformation. That's disinformation. By the way, what is the meaning of disinformation? Is false information purposely spread to influence the public opinion or obscure the truth. Now, you might think, who would be doing something like that? Could that possibly be the Hunter Biden laptop? How about the Russia conspiracy? How about the Ukraine phone call conspiracy? Yeah, there's a lot of things that we can say is disinformation, and it comes from the mainstream news media, and it's been coming from the Biden-Harris administration, the government itself. But that's disinformation, that's okay. It's okay for them to lie to your face about the jab. If you get the jab, you'll have no side effects whatsoever. Well, that was a lie. That was disinformation from Joe Biden himself, December of 2022. He lied to your face. But that's okay. The laptop, it's fake. It's not real. As we can see here in this article, which came from Politico, what was everyone saying? 50 former intelligence officials, by the way, the same people who are now supporting Kamala Harris, the same intelligence officials are now saying Kamala Harris is the greatest thing ever. Those 50 intelligence officials said, nope, the whole story about the Hunter Biden laptop, that's Russian disinformation. It's not real. They said, oh no, it's all untrue. And they lied. Within 3 months, it was independently verified by almost every single major news media organization in the country. Within a year, the FBI itself came out and finally admitted it was real. 2.5 years after this story, we finally got the New York Times to admit that the Russia laptop was real, that it wasn't Russian disinformation, that it actually was the truth, because they were protecting Democrats, because they were trying to fortify for the 2024 election. But they lied to you. That's disinformation. And guess what? John Kerry isn't worried about the disinformation coming from the New York Times. He's not worried about the disinformation coming from the Biden-Harris administration. He doesn't care that Kamala Harris was in a debate and lied to your face on national TV. No, he's worried about you. He's worried about you, the American citizen. How dare you have questions about the government? How dare you not obey? Let's look at what he actually says. I mean, I really want to break this down. Folks, this is crazy to me. And again, these are his words coming from Real Clear Politics. This is coming from the left and center. This isn't... Where's that coming from? Oh.
And I think
Sorry. So let's actually take a look at what he had to say here. John Kerry, he says, quote, the dislike of and anguish over social media is just growing and growing. The people who don't like social media are politicians, because it's where people can reach out very efficiently and quickly and say, I don't like that politician. When Nancy Pelosi said, oh, you have to pass the bill to find out what's in it. Yeah, I was able to share that with everyone. When AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, went on 60 Minutes and she told the world that it doesn't matter. She doesn't care about what's empirically, systemic, semantically, mathematically. She doesn't care about the truth. She cares about feelings, and I can share that whenever people go, well, Democrats, they believe in the truth. No, they don't. AOC said so. We have it, and we can share that. And that's the people who are upset about social media. That's where the anguish is coming from politicians who were used to people just believing them without ever being able to be proven wrong. So the anguish and dislike isn't growing unless you're talking about certain politicians going on. It is part of our problem, particularly in democracies, in terms of building consensus around any issue. It is a problem. The internet and people talking to each other is a problem because they want you to obey. He goes on to say, it's really hard to govern today because people ask questions, because people can look up when you flip-flopped on an issue, kind of like Kamala Harris. We can see in 2019, she said she was against fracking. She never changed her position. Today, when she's running for president, she says, oh, I've changed my position on fracking in 2020. No, she didn't. Joe Biden had a different position on fracking, not Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris was always against fracking until she was looking to get elected, and then she flipped her position. Kamala Harris was happy and promoting the fact that she's East Indian in every election up until she was running for president, and then she started saying that she was an African American. See, that's his problem. That's why you have trouble governing today. We can see the lies, and even when the CBS doesn't do any fact checking, we can do it ourselves. He goes on to say, you can't. The referees we used to have to determine what is fact and what isn't a fact have kind of been eviscerated to a certain degree. That would be the mainstream news media. Yes, the mainstream news media who used to tell us this is the fact isn't the case because we caught them lying. Like the Hunter Biden laptop. The New York Times lied to you, and we caught them. Rachel Maddow, every night for 3 years was telling you that Russia collusion was real, and she lied to you every day. We have the evidence. We can see it and we can share it with each other. And that's why the public trust in the mainstream news media is so low, because we can see the evidence and we can show it to each other and say, no, this is exactly what they said. They're lying to you. So he lost the cover of the mainstream news media. People ask questions. They don't just simply bow down and just take it. And he's upset about that. He goes on to say, and people go and self-select where they go for their news and for their information. Yes, we don't rely on the three. When I grew up, there were 3 stations, ABC, CBS, and NBC. 3 stations, and you got your news from those 3 stations. When I was a teenager, we got to have the local news as well. WPIX Channel 11 in New York. There were 4 stations. Then came in the 80s, going into the 90s, we got cable. And that's when we got the 24-hour news cycle. And we had the ability to choose from more news sources. And we started to be able to see that this one didn't tell me the full story. They didn't cover that story. They didn't give me that quote. They didn't show me that interview, that conversation. And we decided to go and find other things. Then we got the internet, and we were able to look up the article itself. We were able to actually videotape the entire speech ourselves and share it with our friends, because the news media isn't going to show you a 2-hour event over with Donald Trump. Instead, they'll show you 30 seconds of what they want you to see rather than what was actually happening. But I can actually see the entire event. I can see the entire speech and see every word of it and make my own mind up. They're losing power. That's what he's talking about. He's talking about the control that they had over the public because the public didn't know any better, that they had no other way of finding out what was being said. Like when I go and look at what's happening overseas and I look at the BBC or I look at Deutsche Welle, like I showed you, where I see the American government has an envoy who's in the Sudan but isn't trying to get the Americans abandoned by the Biden-Harris administration back home. He will not mention that publicly, but I can see it because I can see the German news station as opposed to waiting for NBC or CBS or the New York Times to try and tell me about it. They won't. It's a news blackout. They stopped talking about Sudan and Americans being abandoned there on May 5th of 2023, and they've never mentioned another word about it. Doesn't mean anyone came home. But let me go on. John Kerry continues to say, so it's really hard, much harder, to build consensus, read that as compliance, today than at any time in the last 40 or 50 years I've been involved with this. He's been involved in government for 40 to 50 years. And he's part of the party that tells you that they have the solutions. 40 to 50 years. Some of their people have been in for almost my entire lifetime, have been just in government, and they still don't have the solutions. They keep telling you, I have the solution. Then why is this still a problem? You've been there for 5 decades. If you have the solution, you should have fixed it by now, shouldn't you? Oh, but we don't want to talk about that. It's like Kamala. You've been in office, you've been there, vice president for 3.5 years dealing with the southern border. Why is today only the second time you've actually been to the southern border? Why didn't you close the border already? You're telling us that you want to build a wall. Well, it was your administration, Kamala Harris, you and Joe Biden, that actually stopped building the wall and sold off all the materials at a loss. It was you guys who opened the border, not Trump, not anyone else. You did that. And now you're telling me you have the solution for illegal immigration? Where have you been? It's been your job for 3.5 years. Oh, but this is why they don't have consensus. Or what he's saying consensus, he means compliance. He means obedience. because we have the evidence at our fingertips. We can look it up and we can actually share it with each other. So when they tell us something that is complete bull, we can actually say, here's the truth. And they can't spin it. Let's go on. John Kerry goes on to say, there's a lot of discussion now about how you curb these entities, that would be the internet social media sites, in order to guarantee that you're going to have some accountability on facts. Now, there is conversation, the Disinformation Governance Board. There are ideas from Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut, Senator Blumenthal, about putting in government controls and oversight onto the internet so that they can censor any and every aspect of the internet. They want censorship. They want to suppress. That's their control. That's why the White House strong-armed Facebook and likely Twitter and likely YouTube and Google strong-armed them to suppress actual information like, hey, there are in fact side effects from the jab. Ooh, that came from who? The WHO, the CDC, from Johns Hopkins. We had the evidence and they said, you can't talk about that. Oh, wearing a mask, wearing 2 masks, wearing 5 masks, guess what? Isn't healthy for you, doesn't work. Oh, well, you got to suppress that too. Nope, you can't talk about it. That's what he's talking about. Curbing that. It is strong-arming the various social media companies to silence the public who are disagreeing with the approved message from the government. He goes on to say, but look, if people only go to one source, and the source they go to is sick and, has an agenda, they're putting out disinformation. Our First Amendment stands as a major block to be able to just, hammer it out of existence. Let's be very clear on this. So if people only go to one source, I grew up, there were only 3 sources, ABC, CBS, NBC. He didn't have a problem with that there were only 3 major. Matter of fact, PBS, which had the, the Neil McNeil hour. So there was 4 channels. 3 of the major channels and 1 other. Now we have far, far more. But he was perfectly fine if people only had the choice of going to ABC News or NBC News or ABC or CBS or to the New York Times. Oh, only one source. He was perfectly fine with that. He's not happy with people going to one source when it isn't the one he likes, when it isn't the one that is promoting his political agenda. Oh, you're not going to MSNBC. You're not going to NBC. You're going to the Gateway Pundit. Oh, well, that's a problem. It's a problem now because you're only going to the Gateway Pundit. You're only looking at this channel right here where I'm looking at news from 30 different sources around the world and I'm giving them to you. Oh, my God. Why are you going to just over at No Soundbites Allowed? I mean, he's only looking at 30 news sources from every country around the world. No, that's bad news. You can't do that. You have to go to MSNBC because they're going to push the approved political message that came straight from the White House. And he says, and the source they go to is sick. Sick for who? Oh, you mean it's not progressive? Well, that's okay. I'm not required to listen to only progressive news. I'm not required to listen to leftist news. I'm not, that's not my obligation. Just because you don't like the source doesn't mean it's wrong. Just because you may or may not like Fox News or ONS or any of these news stations, News Nation, you don't like them doesn't mean they're wrong. And in fact, like people were very upset with, and John Kerry was one of them, who were upset with the New York Post and said, oh, no, I don't like them. The New York Post is sick. They're putting out news about the Hunter Biden laptop because it was true. Just because you didn't like it, John Kerry, just because the Democratic Party didn't like it, just because it didn't get them votes, doesn't mean it wasn't true. So you can call it sick all you want. It doesn't mean it's not the truth. It means you don't like it. It's not politically advantageous to you. And then he goes on to say, excuse me, they're putting out disinformation. Disinformation. That's coming from the government. As I've detailed several times now. That comes from the government. That comes from the mainstream news media. How many people have been fired by New York Times, NBC, CBS, CNN? How many of them have been fired for plagiarism and or just outright making up their own news story? Dozens. Within the last 5 years, dozens of their reporters have been fired for just making up stories or just outright plagiarizing a story. And you're telling me that they're the ones who are the bastions of news, that they're not part of the disinformation? Therefore, John Kerry comes to our First Amendment is the problem. How? You have not made the case that the First Amendment is the problem, because it is our right by birth. Whether you like it or not, whether it is abused or not, it is our right by birth. The government does not have a right in America to stop people. In England, they can't say things. I understand that. They're restricted in the words they can say. And they're now threatening Americans for daring to say things like, Rishi Sunak sucks. You know what? Keir Starmer is an idiot. Keir Starmer is working with the socialists to destroy the UK. Hey, police over in the UK, if you don't like that, come to America, come to the Bronx. I dare you to try and arrest me. I dare you. Rishi Sunak, I can say that Keir Starmer is a traitor to the United Kingdom. He is doing more to destroy the United Kingdom than he is to do anything else. If you don't like that, you don't have to like that. And I'm an American. I can say that. If I were British, I couldn't possibly say that. But you know what? Come to America. I dare you to come to America and try and arrest me for that. I dare you. But this is what John Kerry wants. He wants to do what they're doing in the United Kingdom, to arrest people for saying things he doesn't like. That's evil. That's authoritarian. And he's saying that he's going to do this to help you. He's from the government. He's going to help. I don't think so. He goes on to say, so what we need is to win the ground, win the right to govern by hopefully winning enough votes that you're free to be able to implement change. So they need power, and they need to maintain power so that, and they do that by getting enough votes. And if they have enough power, they can change the First Amendment. They can take away your right to free speech. Even though it is a God-given right, it is a right by birth of every single American, and in my opinion, everyone in the world, that if he can get enough votes, enough people to vote blue, no matter who, that they will take away your right to speak. They will suppress you. They will imprison you. Kind of like they do in the United Kingdom, kind of like what they're doing in Canada as we speak, like we see in France and other nations. They will punish you for not saying the approved thing. This is evil. John Kerry is talking about pure, unadulterated evil, and the mainstream news media is not covering this. They are not talking about this. They don't want you to know that this is the secret sauce that they're trying to put in. That as long as they keep talking about Project 2025, look at what John Kerry is telling you that the Biden-Harris administration, the Democrats, are working on right now. This is why they want power. This is why they switched out Joe Biden for Kamala Harris. They didn't want to lose. They need the power so they can suppress your voice, so they can shut you up. Let me go on. Obviously, there are some people in our country who are prepared to implement change in a whole other way. If you're right wing, the right are evil. They're actually talking. How dare they talk? How dare they have a video, a live stream, a political commentary? How dare they engage the public and actually talk about these issues and actually use their voices and suggest and talk about things, right or wrong, left or right, to have a conversation? How dare they? We are the bad guys. He might as well say MAGA is evil. He might as well say that I, Michael Voss, a black Puerto Rican, is the same thing as a Nazi, because that's what that line is saying right there. That is what he is telling you. If you do not believe and obey the approved message from the government, then you're a Nazi. That's what he just said. He goes on and finishes with, I think democracies are very challenged right now and have not proven that they can move fast enough big enough to deal with the challenges that they are facing. The government can't keep up with you on social media. They can't go to all the different sites that you go to alter the news. They don't have control of everywhere that you're sharing information and having conversations with your friends with, and they want to. So the government's having that challenge. He goes on to say, and to me, that is part of what this election is all about. That's what the 2024 election's about. Giving the government the power to silence you, to suppress you, to punish you, an American citizen. There are people around the world that are dying. Hang on, let me bring this up here. There are people around the world who are dying right now because they want a sliver of the freedom that America represents. There are people in Hong Kong, the entire governing body of Hong Kong, 47 elected officials disappeared around the world. They had to go into hiding, and many of them have disappeared because the Chinese government made them disappear because they dared to ask for a sliver of the freedom that the United States represents. Because they dared to sing the American national anthem in Hong Kong, people disappeared forever. People in China have disappeared. The Uyghurs disappeared because they're religious. And the Chinese government didn't like that religion. This is what John Kerry is telling you he wants for you. That he wants to disappear people because they have an unapproved thought. That he wants to silence you and punish you. He wants a social credit score so that he can punish people when they don't obey the government. This is autocratic. This is a dictatorship. This is evil being pushed. And John Kerry is saying it out in the open. He said this. I got this from Politico. This is his words. This was on screen. I'm sharing this link at the end of the show. Does anyone think I'm wrong in my assessment of what John Kerry has said?